The notion first struck Eliza May Dawson while she was knee-deep in the partially frozen mire beneath their elevated dwelling, attempting to recover a runaway tin of lard that had slipped through a floorboard crevice. It was February of 1847, and the harsh winter of the Montana Territory had already exacted a toll, claiming 2 of their neighbors. One succumbed to pneumonia, the other to sheer destitution when their root cellar succumbed to the frost. Eliza had been a widow for 8 months, left with a daughter of 5 years, a cabin with a floor elevated higher than necessary by her late husband, and a formidable resilience, a trait both demanded and fostered by the rugged frontier existence. She stooped into the low space beneath the house, a lantern in hand, grumbling about the 18-inch void between the earth and the floorboards, an extravagance James had insisted upon. Superior drainage, he declared, to ward off decay. Yet, this very feature also created a frigid, unproductive void that funneled every gust of wind, sweeping across the Montana plains. Standing there, lantern aloft, lard tin retrieved and caked in half-frozen mud, Eliza experienced an unforeseen sensation. Warmth. It was meager, but in stark contrast to the biting external cold, a frigid 15 degrees with a wind that felt like a blade, the area under the cabin was remarkably warmer. She remained still, trying to comprehend this subtle thermal shift. Heat from the cooking stove above was radiating down through the floor. The ground beneath, insulated by the accumulated snow around the foundation, was releasing its stored autumnal warmth. Even the log walls extending to ground level served to trap this heat. Eliza May stood motionless, her breath misting faintly in the lantern's glow, an idea taking root, one that was either remarkably brilliant or utterly absurd. What if this under-house void wasn't wasted space? What if it could be transformed into a greenhouse? The thought was so bold, it elicited a laugh, a brief, sharp sound in the confined space. A greenhouse in the heart of a Montana winter, conceived by a widow with barely enough funds for spring seeds. Yet, the more she pondered it, the more the underlying principles made sense. Heat rises, certainly, but it also disperses. Their cooking stove blazed throughout the winter, a necessity for both sustenance and warmth. This heat warmed the cabin floor, and a portion of it was escaping downward, unused. If she could capture and contain this escaped heat, perhaps even amplify it with glass to harness solar energy, the possibilities expanded. She lingered for another 10 minutes, the chill forgotten, as her mind raced through a cascade of potential solutions. She dedicated 2 weeks to careful contemplation before confiding her burgeoning idea to anyone, including her daughter, Grace. Eliza had learned that prematurely unveiling half-formed plans invariably invited either misplaced pity or outright ridicule, neither of which she could afford. Instead, she focused on observation, meticulous measurement, and strategic planning. The cabin rested upon 12 substantial stone piers, each sunk 3 feet into the earth and rising 18 inches above ground level. James had implemented this design after witnessing the pervasive decay of frontier cabins due to ground contact. The floor joists were roughly hewn pine, 14 inches deep, spanning 8 feet between the piers. Above these, inch-thick pine planks formed the actual floor, interspersed with gaps intended for drainage. These very gaps, Eliza realized, were ideal for heat transfer. The sub-floor cavity was approximately 20 feet by 16 feet, enclosed on 3 sides by the cabin's log walls that extended to ground level. The front faced south, open to the elements. While this openness facilitated airflow in the summer, it created a brutal wind tunnel during winter. However, if she could seal this southern exposure with glass, a significant obstacle emerged. Glass was costly, fragile, and incredibly difficult to transport across the frontier without shattering. The nearest sizable settlement was a 3-day wagon journey, and the closest source of window glass was likely St. Louis, a month's travel away under favorable conditions. Eliza required an alternative. Her solution materialized within the worn pages of the Sears and Roebuck catalog, a volume graciously lent by Mrs. Peterson, its leaves dog-eared and stained from extensive frontier use. Amidst advertisements for cast-iron stoves and proprietary medicines, she discovered precisely what she needed: cold frames for greenhouses. The description was straightforward. Wooden frames, 3 feet by 6 feet, with glazed sash tops hinged for ventilation, designed to protect delicate plants from frost. Priced at $4.50 each, they were advertised as essential for the progressive farmer. These were intended to sit directly on the ground, forming miniature shelters for starting seeds. But Eliza envisioned them differently. If she procured 6 of these frames and installed them vertically along the south-facing opening of her crawl space, she would create a glass facade. The hinged tops would offer ventilation, and the wooden frames would prove far more manageable to install than loose panes of glass. The total cost would be $27, nearly all the money remaining from the sale of James's tools. That evening, Grace found her mother engrossed in arithmetic by candlelight, the catalog spread open, numbers scrawled onto a slate. "Mama, what are you calculating?" Eliza looked at her daughter, small for her 5 years, possessing a gravity far beyond her age, clad in a dress that had been let out twice and was still noticeably short. Grace deserved more than the daily fare of salt pork and cornmeal. She deserved vegetables, fresh greens, something vibrant even in the depths of winter. "I'm figuring out how to grow food in February," Eliza replied. Grace's eyes widened. "It's like magic engineering," Eliza corrected, then softened her tone. "Come here, let me show you something." She took Grace's hand and led her to a corner where the floorboards displayed the widest gaps. Lighting a candle, she held it near an opening. "Watch the flame." The candle's flame flickered and bent downward, drawn by the draft of warm air descending through the floor. "Heat rises," Eliza explained, "but it also spreads. The warmth from our stove heats the floor. Some of that warmth sinks down into the space below. Right now it just escapes into the cold. But if we could trap it, make that space into a room with glass walls, we could keep it warm enough to grow things, vegetables, herbs, perhaps even flowers." Grace was silent for a moment, contemplating. Then, will it work? Eliza May Dawson, who had been posing that very question to herself for 2 weeks, looked at her daughter and offered the only truthful response she knew. "I'm going to find out." The order took 6 weeks to arrive, traveling up the Missouri River by steamboat before being transferred to a freight wagon for the overland journey. When the wagon driver unloaded 6 wooden crates conspicuously marked fragile glass, nearly everyone from the trading post had gathered to witness the spectacle. "Building a greenhouse, Mrs. Dawson?" inquired Tom Morrison, the post manager, his tone not unkind. "Something of that nature," Eliza responded, carefully examining the crates for any signs of damage. "A significant expenditure for a mere possibility," commented Frank Hutchkins, who had lost his own wife to childbirth the previous spring and harbored strong opinions on how widows ought to manage their limited resources. Eliza offered no reply. She had learned that attempting to justify oneself to doubters was a futile endeavor. She settled the freight charges, hired Morrison's eldest son to assist in loading the crates onto her wagon, and then drove home. Grace was waiting on the porch, practically quivering with anticipation. "Are they here? Did they break?" "They've arrived," Eliza confirmed, "and we'll soon know if they suffered any damage." Together, they opened the first crate, carefully prying away the nails to preserve the contents. Nestled within straw was a remarkable object, a wooden frame, 3 feet wide and 6 feet long, crafted from pine and painted white. The upper section comprised a glazed sash, featuring 12 panes of glass, each intact, set within a hinged frame that operated smoothly on brass hinges. Grace extended a delicate finger to touch the glass. "It's so smooth." "It is," Eliza agreed, "and costly. We must be exceedingly careful with it." They spent the remainder of the day unpacking all 6 frames. By some improbable fortune of freight handling, or perhaps divine intervention, only 1 pane was cracked, and even that was a clean fracture that could be mended with putty and remain functional. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep, Eliza sat at the table and sketched her plans. She wasn't an engineer, but James had instilled in her the principle of thorough planning before commencing any project. Measure twice, cut once. Anticipate potential failures. Build for durability. The south-facing opening beneath the cabin measured approximately 16 feet wide and 18 inches tall. from ground level to the base of the floor joists. Her 6 cold frames, when stood upright, would be 2 tall. Each frame was 6 feet long, and the opening was merely 18 inches high. She would need to modify them, shorten them, and install them horizontally in 2 tiers, 3 frames on the lower row and 3 on the upper, to construct a glass wall 6 feet in height and 18 feet in width. The mathematics were sound. The crucial question was her ability to execute the carpentry. She commenced work the following morning, after Grace had finished her breakfast. The task demanded a level of precision she was unsure she possessed, but necessity proved an exceptional instructor. First, she needed to prepare the opening itself. The space between the ground and the floor joists was currently just an open void. She had to construct a proper frame, establishing a stable wall structure against which the glass frames could be mounted. Eliza cut 2x4 pine lumber to the required lengths using James's crosscut saw, a tool she had learned to sharpen herself during the long winter. She erected vertical studs every 3 feet along the south-facing opening, measuring with meticulous care using a knotted string marked at 12-inch intervals. Each stud had to be precisely plumb to prevent any structural warping. She sank the base of each stud 6 inches into the earth, firmly tamping the soil with a wooden mallet. The tops she secured to the underside of the floor joists with hand-forged nails, an expensive but necessary component. Each nail represented a calculation. Would it hold? Could she afford it? What were the consequences of an error? Subsequently, she added horizontal crosspieces at 2 distinct heights, one 6 inches from the ground and another 12 inches up, creating a grid framework designed to distribute the weight of the glass and withstand wind pressure. This was another lesson from James. Any structure requires both vertical and horizontal support. Vertical elements bear the load, while horizontal elements resist lateral forces. Grace assisted, handing her nails one at a time from an old tobacco tin and steadying boards when Eliza required both hands for the saw. She was learning without explicit instruction. "Why are we making boxes, Mama?" "Because glass needs something strong to rest against," Eliza explained, pausing to wipe sawdust from her forehead. "If we simply hung it in the air, the wind would shatter it. But if we provide it with a robust frame, it can endure. The frame absorbs the stress. The glass merely fulfills its function." Grace considered this. "Like how my doll needs me to hold her." Eliza smiled. "Precisely like that." The work spanned 3 days of sustained effort. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached from the unfamiliar angles of working overhead. Yet by the end, Eliza had constructed a sturdy wall frame featuring 6 rectangular openings, each precisely sized to accommodate her cold frame windows. The structure was solid, square, and ready for the next stage. She had also discovered something new about herself. She could accomplish this. She could measure, cut, and build. This newfound knowledge felt like power. Now came the delicate operation of installing the glass. After the first day's work, she had adjusted her approach. Rather than shortening the cold frames, which might compromise their integrity, she decided to install them at an angle, tilted, to maximize solar exposure. The bottom frames would be positioned nearly horizontal, angled upwards at 30 degrees. The top frames would be more vertical, forming a sloped glass wall that mimicked the trajectory of the winter sun. It was an unconventional method, but it made practical sense. She was creating something for which no catalog offered guidance. The first frame was mounted on a Saturday. Eliza lifted it with great care, Grace guiding from below, and secured it to the frame with screws rather than nails. Screws offered the advantage of adjustability should she have miscalculated. The frame fit perfectly. The glass caught the morning light, reflecting it back in brilliant sheets. Grace clapped her hands. "It's beautiful, Mama." It was indeed. Eliza immediately noticed a tangible difference. With even a single frame in place, the wind was noticeably abated. The space felt calmer. By the week's end, all 6 frames were mounted. The south-facing opening was now a wall of glass, angled and radiant. The hinged sash tops could still be opened for ventilation, but for the time being, Eliza kept them firmly closed. She had successfully created a greenhouse beneath her home in Montana during winter. Now, the critical question remained, would it actually function? The initial test occurred that night. Eliza prepared dinner as usual: salt pork, beans, cornbread, ensuring the cook stove remained hot. After Grace was asleep, she descended into the underhouse space, carrying a lantern and a thermometer. The thermometer registered 48 degrees. Outside, the temperature was 19 degrees and dropping. Inside the cabin, near the stove, it was 65 degrees. And here, in this intermediary space, shielded by glass and warmed by the floor above, it was 48 degrees, just above freezing, barely, but above. Eliza May Dawson allowed herself a moment of profound satisfaction. The underlying principle was sound. Heat from the stove was indeed seeping through the floorboards. The glass was effectively trapping it. The earth below was contributing its stored warmth. It wasn't yet warm enough for most vegetables, but it was a promising beginning. Over the subsequent week, she implemented further improvements. She banked earth against the exterior of the glass frames, creating an insulating berm that minimized heat loss from the base. She sealed any gaps between the frames using oakum, the same tarred hemp fibers used for caulking ships, available at the trading post. She introduced thermal mass, dark-colored materials that absorb heat during the day and radiate it back at night. This was a technique she had encountered in an agricultural journal. She gathered river stones, painted them black using lampblack mixed with linseed oil, and arranged them in barrels beneath the glass. During the day, sunlight would warm them, and at night they would radiate heat. The temperature gradually increased, reaching 50, then 52, then 55 degrees. Finally, when the thermometer consistently registered 58 degrees for 3 consecutive nights, Eliza deemed it time. "Grace," she announced one morning, "today we're going to plant a garden." The soil itself presented a significant challenge. She couldn't excavate frozen ground, and the earth beneath the house, while unfrozen, was a compacted, lifeless hardpan, compressed by years of foot traffic and dripping water from the floorboards above. She needed to construct garden beds from scratch. Utilizing scrap lumber that James had stockpiled, she built raised beds. These were simple boxes 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, arranged in rows on either side of a central walkway she had planned. Each box demanded careful construction. The sides had to be robust enough to contain the weight of the soil, yet she couldn't afford to waste precious wood. She cut the boards, drilled pilot holes to prevent splitting, and assembled them using the last of James's square-cut nails. She had anticipated this need, ordering not only the glass frames but also seeds and a substance she had never encountered before, mentioned in the agricultural journal Mrs. Peterson had loaned her. Composted manure, dried and aged, suitable for hotbeds and forcing houses. It arrived in burlap sacks that emitted a characteristic odor. Grace wrinkled her nose dramatically. "That's horrid, Mama." "That's fertility," Eliza corrected, though she privately agreed. "Plants adore it. It's rich in everything they require to grow. Nitrogen, phosphorus, organic matter, and it generates heat as it decomposes, which we need." She filled the raised beds in meticulous layers, a technique she had learned from the journal. The bottom layer consisted of 6 inches of the dried manure, which would slowly decompose, warming the soil from below. Next came prairie soil she had collected in the autumn and stored in barrels. This was rich, dark loam from a creek bottom where native grasses had flourished for centuries. She mixed this with more composted manure, creating a nutrient-dense growing medium. The final top layer, 2 inches deep, was fine soil mixed with sand for drainage and to facilitate seed germination. Each bed took approximately an hour to fill. Grace helped scoop soil, tamping it gently with her small hands, constantly posing questions. Why does the manure create heat? Because tiny creatures you cannot see consume it, and when they eat, they produce warmth, much like how you feel warm after eating supper. There are creatures in the dirt, millions of them. They are helpers. The beds steamed faintly in the cool air when Eliza first watered them with warm water from the stove. The decomposing manure was generating its own heat, precisely as the journal had promised. She watched with satisfaction as the steam rose, biology and physics working in concert, everything interconnected. Then came the planting. Eliza had selected her seeds with great care, choosing varieties specifically bred for cold frames and winter cultivation. These included Tom Thumb lettuce, Laxton's marvel cabbage, early round spinach, and herbs such as parsley, chives, and wintertime. She also ordered seeds for carrots and radishes, quick-growing varieties that could tolerate cool soil. Grace lent a hand, her small fingers surprisingly adept at spacing the seeds. "Not too deep," Eliza instructed. "Lettuce seeds require light to sprout. Just press them into the soil and cover lightly." They worked together throughout the afternoon, planting row by row. By evening, 6 raised beds were planted, watered, and awaiting their germination. "Now what?" Grace inquired. "Now we wait," Eliza replied, "and hope." The seeds germinated in 8 days. Eliza had been checking twice daily, descending into the greenhouse each morning and evening with her lantern, anxious about temperature fluctuations, moisture levels, damping off, fungal diseases, seed-eating insects, every potential failure her reading had warned her about. She had meticulously kept a journal of temperatures, noting that the greenhouse maintained a steady range between 55 and 62 degrees, depending on the external temperature and the intensity of the cookstove's heat. But on the 8th morning, February 28th, according to her careful calendar keeping, she descended with the lantern and discovered tiny green shoots emerging in the lettuce bed, dozens of them, perfectly spaced in the rows she and Grace had planted. She immediately summoned Grace, unable to contain her excitement. "Look very carefully, right there." Grace peered at the soil, initially confused, seeing only dark earth. Then, Eliza adjusted the lantern's angle, and suddenly they were visible, minuscule sprouts, pale green and impossibly fragile, pushing through the dark soil like tiny miracles. Is that lettuce?" "That's lettuce," Eliza confirmed, her voice betraying the emotion she felt, relief, triumph, and the sheer joy of a gamble that had paid off. "We're growing food in February in Montana, under the house." Grace extended one small finger, stopping just short of touching. "May I touch it?" "Very gently. The stem is delicate." And Grace touched the tiny plant with a fingertip, her expression solemn. "It's soft." "It is," Eliza replied. "And in a few weeks, if we care for it, it'll be large enough to eat." More sprouts emerged over the following days. The spinach germinated in neat, uniform rows. Eliza had been more precise with spacing after the lettuce. The radishes emerged rapidly, their cotyledons unfurling like tiny hands, reaching for the filtered sunlight. The carrots were slower, taking 12 days, but eventually appeared as delicate fern-like shoots. The cabbage seeds germinated within 10 days, producing sturdy seedlings that Eliza knew would require thinning later. She thinned the lettuce on the 14th day, carefully pulling every other seedling to allow the remaining plants adequate space to grow. It felt like a waste, until Grace pointed out that they could eat the thinnings. They did. Tiny lettuce plants, roots and all, washed and added to their dinner. They were small, but they were fresh, green, and alive, and they tasted of hope. Word spread. News on the frontier traveled through a combination of gossip, visits to the trading post, and the arrival of freight wagons. By March, the community knew that the Dawson widow had constructed some sort of apparatus beneath her house and was purportedly growing vegetables during the winter. Some dismissed it as rumor. Others assumed she had somehow preserved autumn vegetables and was fabricating her claims of fresh produce. Frank Hutchkins openly declared she was squandering her resources on foolishness. Then, Mrs. Peterson paid a visit. She was the wife of the trading post manager, a pragmatic woman in her 50s who had survived 20 years on the frontier by maintaining an open mind to new ideas. She brought Grace a rag doll as a gift, hand-sewn with embroidered eyes and yarn hair, and politely inquired if she might see this greenhouse that everyone was discussing. Eliza obliged. Mrs. Peterson descended the stairs into the underhouse space, lantern in hand, and stopped abruptly. The metamorphosis was extraordinary. What had been a somber, cramped underfloor area was now a vibrant sanctuary for plant life. The glass panes shimmered, suffused with a diffused sunlight. The elevated planting boxes teemed with vigorous growth, lettuce foliage a deep, rich green, spinach robust and healthy, radish tops a striking emerald, carrot fronds as delicate as lace. Sturdy cabbage seedlings and aromatic herbs filled the warm, humid atmosphere. 2 lanterns positioned at the foot of the stairs cast a golden luminescence that mingled with the daylight filtering through the glass. The ambient temperature was pleasant, hovering around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The air carried the scent of fertile soil, burgeoning vegetation, and pure well water. It was the aroma of life itself. Mrs. Peterson ambled along the central walkway, her gaze meticulously surveying every detail. She gently stroked a lettuce leaf, assessing its texture. She leaned in to inhale the fragrance of the herbs. She carefully observed how the glass panels were affixed. She ran her fingers over the painted rocks. Comprehending their function, she felt the surface of a raised bed, sensing the gentle warmth emanating from the composting manure beneath. Finally, she turned to Eliza, a look of profound admiration in her eyes. "You have constructed a hothouse beneath your dwelling, utilizing cold frames and provisions acquired through mail order." "Yes, ma'am," Eliza replied. "And how warm does it remain?" "Between 55 and 62 degrees, depending on the external temperature and how much I utilize the cook stove. It is warmer on sunny days. I maintain a log." She presented Mrs. Peterson with her meticulously kept journal, detailing daily temperature readings. "And it is the warmth from your floor that sustains this temperature. The floor heating contributes, certainly. The sun's rays through the glass, the earth below, the thermal mass," Eliza explained, gesturing towards the painted rocks. "These elements help to stabilize the temperature. The decomposing manure also generates heat. It all functions in concert." Mrs. Peterson shook her head slowly. "My husband must witness this. Half the trading post needs to see this. This could revolutionize how people endure the winter months here. Fresh produce in February, a means to extend the growing season by several months." Eliza demurred. "It is merely vegetables, Mrs. Peterson. It is ingenuity. It is resilience. It is irrefutable evidence that the frontier does not necessitate months of privation and scurvy." She paused. "May I bring others to observe it? You may possess something of considerable importance here." Eliza hesitated momentarily, then nodded. "Good ideas are meant to be shared. Yes, by all means, bring them." By April, the lettuce was ready for harvesting. Eliza carefully selected the outer leaves, allowing the central portions to continue their development. This method, known as cut and come again, ensured a continuous supply of greens. The spinach was plentiful, and the radishes were crisp with a peppery bite. She prepared the first salad in 4 months. Grace regarded the bowl of fresh greens with an expression of wonder, as if witnessing a miracle. "May I eat it?" "That is precisely its purpose," Eliza said, a smile gracing her lips. They dined together, seated at their rustic, hand-hewn table. Fresh lettuce and radishes, simply dressed with a touch of vinegar and salt. The meal was uncomplicated, yet profoundly satisfying. Grace chewed thoughtfully, then looked up. "This tastes like summer." Eliza felt a prickling sensation behind her eyes. Her daughter had appeared so wan throughout the winter, subsisting on preserved foods and salted meat. Already, after just 1 week of fresh vegetables, a healthy flush had returned to her cheeks. "It does it not?" Mrs. Peterson arrived with her husband the following week. Subsequently, they brought the Morrison family. Then Frank Hutchkins came, initially skeptical and inclined to argue, but he departed quiet and contemplative. By May, when the outdoor soil had finally thawed sufficiently to commence traditional gardening, Eliza May Dawson had received 11 requests for assistance in constructing analogous enclosed gardens. She also received an offer from the regional representative of Sears and Roebuck to document her design for inclusion in their catalog, accompanied by a modest payment for the publication rights. She readily agreed to both proposals. The catalog listing appeared in the autumn of 1848 edition, under the heading of Innovative Agricultural Solutions for the Forward-Thinking Homesteader. It featured precise measurements, a comprehensive list of required materials, and Eliza's detailed notes on temperature regulation and ventilation strategies. The payment, $15, represented more currency than she had handled in a single transaction since James's passing. More significantly, the design reached individuals she would never encounter in regions she would never visit, aiding families she would never know in surviving winters that might otherwise have overwhelmed them. The narrative could have concluded here. A frontier innovation, a clever woman's solution to winter scarcity, a modest triumph that assisted a few families in enduring. However, What Eliza May had conceived was of far greater consequence than she had initially grasped. The Underhouse greenhouse effectively addressed multiple frontier challenges concurrently. It capitalized on underutilized space. It necessitated no supplementary heating beyond the standard household stove. It provided sustenance during the most perilous months and could be erected using materials readily available through mail order catalogs. By the subsequent year, Eliza had aided 7 families in constructing their own variations. Each had been subtly tailored, adapted to their particular cabin architecture and individual requirements. Some incorporated additional glass. Others integrated cisterns for storing warmed water. One family constructed theirs entirely below ground level, creating a true subterranean greenhouse with only the glass panes visible above the surface. Eliza found herself evolving into an unexpected authority. She offered her advice without charge, but accepted remuneration for her direct involvement in construction, a fair day's wage for a fair day's labor. This was sufficient to augment her income and provide a measure of financial security. Meanwhile, Grace discovered she possessed a natural aptitude for horticulture. She assumed a significant portion of the greenhouse management, learning to discern the subtle indicators of stress or ailment, to judiciously control ventilation, and to schedule plantings for continuous yield. On a winter evening in December of 1848, nearly 2 years after Eliza had first stood in the damp earth beneath her cabin, harboring a bold idea, she sat on the stairs descending into the greenhouse. Grace sat beside her, clutching the rag doll Mrs. Peterson had gifted her, now well worn and cherished. The lanterns cast a gentle, inviting glow. The plants flourished in their orderly beds. Outside, through the open doorway at the top of the stairs, snow was falling steadily. Yet here, beneath the floor, it was warm, verdant, and alive. "Mama," Grace said softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you miss Papa?" It was a question Grace occasionally posed, always with sincerity, always when something evoked the memory of James. "Every day," Eliza replied truthfully. "But I believe he would be proud of this. He built a cabin to ensure our safety. We have cultivated a garden to ensure our sustenance. We are both accomplishing what must be done." Grace nodded, content with this explanation. She nestled against her mother, and they sat in comfortable silence, enveloped by the tangible evidence of ingenuity, perseverance, and the fundamental human spirit's refusal to succumb to adversity. The greenhouse beneath the floor had originated as a desperate concept during a challenging winter. It had blossomed into something more profound. Proof that even under the most arduous conditions, even with limited resources, even when others declared it impossible, a determined mind could forge a path forward. Eliza May Dawson had not merely constructed a greenhouse. She had cultivated a future, one meticulous seed at a time. Outside, the winter raged.